Hello YouTube, MTGA, and today we are going to have a look at the full set review of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty for Historic Brawl. We are now going to look into the blue cards of the set, all the other colors, and then also multicolor and colorless will be separate videos, so in total 6 videos, because I'm doing colorless and multicolored together. Link to those as soon as they go up is in the description, and without further ado, just let's jump straight into it. And the first one we have here is Acquisition Octopus. It's a 3 mana, 2 and a blue artifact creature equipment octopus with 2/2, and whenever it deals combat damage or the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and then you can basically equip it to a creature for 2 mana. So, just as an equipment, it's 3 to play, 2 to equip, doesn't give any stats, and that is not really great. And we have a bunch of these 3 mana, 2/2 creatures that whenever they deal combat damage, you draw a card. The main problem is that this doesn't have any evasion to help it, like, go in, and then you mostly want to equip this to something, but 5 mana total to equip this is a lot. So I am not totally sold on this one. We do get a bunch of artifact creatures though, so maybe just having a high quantity of artifact creatures for certain decks is just what these decks want. But other than that, I don't think this will see too much play. Next up, Anchor to Reality, Tuna Blue, Sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then search your library for an equipment or vehicle card, put it into the battlefield, then shuffle. If it has mana value less than the sacrifice permanent's mana value, scry 2. I think this is amazing. This card is something that will only get better and better over time. So this is basically how I think this card will play out, right? Currently we do get a bunch of huge vehicles currently, but the more cards come into the pool, the better this card gets, because this is a tutor that puts into the battlefield and not even tapped, which is important. There are some really, like, we have a 7 mana 7/7 vehicle that crews for 2 with, I think, Trample and Vigilance or something like that. And just putting that into the battlefield early can be extremely potent. There have been some really generous equipments in Magic's past, and as soon as those come into like arena, this is basically the card to fetch them out for. So like, this is a card you will see more and more being played, the more like broken equipments and vehicles come into arena. Currently we don't really have that many broken vehicles at all, but this is a tutor that puts to the battlefield, so that is really strong. Armguard Familiar, 1 in the blue, 2/1 artifact creature equipment beast, with ward 2. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has ward 2. So this thing is pretty good in artifact like aggro affinity style decks, just because it's a 2 mana 2/1 with ward 2. And beyond that, I don't see this being attached to something, because like equipping for 4 mana is a big cost. So I'm not going to play this to equip to something, but overall just a decent body with a neat little effect onto it, and good for critical mass basically. Awakened Awareness, X double blue, enchant artifact or creature. When Awakened Awareness enters the battlefield, put X +1/+1 counters on enchanted permanent, and as long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it has base power and toughness 1/1. I don't really get this card, to be honest. I don't know what Wizards wants us to do with it exactly. So in the case we put this like play this for x equals 0, we can put this onto an opponent's creatures, and now it just has base power and toughness 1/1. So it's basically shrinking opponent's creatures, but it costs just so much to like get any value out of it. If we like want to put additional counters on something, it's like there is one neat interaction with this, and that is the Ozolith. So Ozolith is an artifact that you basically can move the counters from the artifact to other things. And with this, you can enchant the Ozolith and then put more counters on that, and that moves more counters around. So that's kind of a cool interaction, but I don't see this card being like good. Behold the Unspeakable, 3 and double blue. Saga, first chapter. Creatures you don't control get -2/-0 until your next turn. Second chapter, if you have one of your cards in hand, draw 4 cards, otherwise scry 2, then draw 2 cards. And then the third chapter transforms into Vision of the Unspeakable, a flying trample enchantment creature that gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand and has 0/0 base power and toughness. So the big thing on this saga is the second chapter, potentially drawing you 4 cards, which is massive. But the problem is decks that usually want to like draw cards, like blue decks really like their card draw to be at instant speed to basically either like counter, and if I don't counter, I draw, right? So this is a big investment. Also, having one or fewer cards in hand is actually not that easy, especially in blue, where you are going to draw a bunch of cards, right? And also on curve, like this is really hard to draw 4 of, unless you're in a top deck war. But then the body is like, let's say it's a 5/5 on average, like 4/4, 5/5, which is like decent. But I think overall this might just be a little bit too slow. So yeah, that's probably no for me. Cover Technician, 2 in a blue, 2/4. Out of a creature, human ninja ninjutsu for 1 in a blue, and then whenever it deals combat damage to play, you may put an artifact card with mana value less or equal to that damage from your hand onto the battlefield. So for the general gist of the ninjutsu creatures is that you mostly want to evaluate them for their ninjutsu cost, because that's what you're going to pay more often than not. And then this is basically ninjutsu to put a 2/4 into a battlefield, and then you might put an artifact card with mana value less or equal to that damage from the hand to the battlefield. I can see this being played in affinity aggro decks, if you put it into play and then you basically, let's say you have a 1-drop, and then you swing in a 2, like deal 2 damage to the opponent, and then put a 2-drop into the battlefield. So that's like kind of decent, right? Because like by turn 2 you have basically put a 2/4 into play as your 1-drop, and then you still made your regular 2-drop. So that's like pretty decent. If you're just playing a ninjas, you're probably playing this just to have the critical mass of ninjutsus. But other than that, I don't see it being played. But I think in the deck it fits in, and it slots in perfectly fine. Next up, Discover the Impossible. 2 in a blue instant. Look at the top 5 of your library, exile one of them face down, put the rest to the bottom of library in random order. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's an instant spell with a mana value 2 or less, and if you don't, then put it into hand. So this is quite an interesting card. I'm not really sure about how to evaluate. The reason for that is it's a 3 mana instant that digs 5 deep and only puts 1 into hand, right? So it's like a 1-for-1. We have similar cards with Selani Vision. Selani Vision has been a pretty decent card to put into a bunch of decks because of the modal nature of it, where you can play land instead of just digging. And there is also there is also a counter spell from Amonkhet that you can either counter something or dig deep. And the strength of those is that you can do either or. This really doesn't give you that option. And you really, like, if you want to counter something, like, you really hope to get a counters out of this. And I don't think this is too great. Maybe if you're a deck that really tries to dig for something, you want to play this, but other than that, I think you're better off playing the other two cards. Disruption Protocol, double blue. As an additional cost to cast a spell, tap an untapped artifact you control or pay 1 counter target spell. So if you have just like a leather armor sitting around, you can just like counterspell something. Like equipments really don't tap even if the creature attacks, and then you just like tap that equipment. Like if you're tapping a mana rock for this, it doesn't matter if you paid 1 or just tapped the artifact, right? So that kind of doesn't matter. But I think in artifact decks, this is definitely one of the best counter spells you can put in, because like if you're looking at something like Emery, you can just tap your Ornithopter that you played for 0 mana, because like they don't tap for mana, it's just that you have to tap the artifact. So like if it's a creature, it doesn't need to have haste. So yeah, that I think this card is pretty good. Yeah, if you're playing an artifact deck and you're in blue, yeah, you're playing this, otherwise you're not. Essence Capture, this is a reprint. Essence Capture is really not seeing any play, mainly because double blue is actually an unreasonable cost to pay. So yeah, next up. Futurist Operative, 3 in a blue, 3 for Human Ninja. As long as Futurist Operative is tapped, it is a human citizen with base power and toughness 1/1 and can't be blocked. And for 2 in a blue, untap Futurist Operative. So this is basically, like, this is a really interesting design. The main problem is that this card costs 4, but as soon as it's in play, it can attack, and then after blocks, but before damage, you untap it, and then it actually swings in for 3 damage. So that's kind of cool. But ultimately, the problem with this card is its mana cost, and I don't think this will see play. Futurist Sentinel, 3 in a blue, 6/6 artifact vehicle, crew 3. We are getting a bunch of vehicles. And if we ever have a vehicle deck in blue, this will see play in there just because it's a vehicle, and like a decently statted one. But I don't think vanilla vehicles are that amazing. So yeah, next card. Go Shintai of Lost Wisdom, 1 in a blue, 0/4, legendary enchantment creature, shrine, flying. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay 1. If you do, target play mills X cards, who access the number of shrines you control. So what I didn't talk about in my previous video was, like for the white review, is this can be your commander. Like these shrines are always legendary, and then it's a creature now, so this can be a commander. I don't think it should be, but it's interesting to point out, right? So as far as shrines go, I think this is one of the weakest shrine effects we've seen in a long time, because milling is really not the axis that shrines want to win. Like shrines give you advantage, and then like to further your own game plan. Like milling doesn't do anything and arguably can help the opponent until they're decked out, and we're in a 100 card format, so I think this is pretty unreasonable to do. However, this is a 2 mana 0/4 with the type Shrine, and that in itself is pretty valuable in a Shrine deck, just because like you're rarely having a turn 2 Shrine play in Shrines. And this can just be a turn 2 Shrine, and then you can play a turn 3 Shrine, and then you already get like more value out of that Shrine. So just by that fact, I think this is very playable in Shrines, but you're rarely going to activate the actual effect of this card. Guardians of Oboro, 2 in a blue, 3/4 creature, Moonfolk, Samurai, Defender. Modified creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have Defender. This is basically draft filler. I don't think I will play this in any deck. Inventive Iteration, 3 in the blue, Saga, first chapter, return up to 1 target creature or planeswalkers to its owner's hand. Second chapter, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. If you can't, draw a card. And then third chapter, transform into Living Breakthrough. Enchantment creatures, Moonfolk, flying. Whenever you cast a spell, your opponents can't cast a spell with the same mana value as that spell until your next turn. Okay. Let's go to the front side first. For 4 mana, you're getting some tempo with returning creature planeswalkers, right? Then the second chapter gives you some card advantage. Notably, you can't choose to draw a card even if you have a really bad artifact in your graveyard. You have to take the artifact. So this is like, okay, it's nice card advantage, but the real kicker is the creature on the backside. It is pretty slow to bring out, but it is potentially an absolutely game-winning effect. If you are a deck that can consistently just like play a 1/2/3 drop, or like if you're against like Azorius Control, you just play a 4 and 5, and now they're basically just completely locked out of playing board wipes, and then even if they counter it, you still cast that spell. So yeah, it's really, really hard and annoying to get rid of at sorcery speed for the opponent if you are a deck that can consistently use this. So it is pretty slow. The front side gives you a decent amount of value, and this is potentially game winning and maybe just again too slow, but I think I am excited to see this in action. Invoke the Winds, 1 4 blue and sorcery, gain control of target artifact or creature, untap it. So just to get this out of the way, we can use this on our own artifact or creature to untap them, but the price is honestly really, really costly. So I'm not too sure how often we are going to use that. Maybe some decks want to do that, but the main use is to just steal an artifact or creature, and we have some steal effects. This is basically unconditional. It's pretty cheap for this price, but I think this is the cheapest unconditional steal effect we have for creatures. But the casting cost is pretty brutal. I think you're only going to use this in mono blue decks, and then you might want to have something different. But overall, it's playable in some decks, but mostly unplayable in all the other decks. So yeah, next card. Jin-Gitaxias, Progress Tyrant, 5 double blue, 5/5 legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets and triggers only once. And whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, counter that spell. This ability triggers only once. So this is basically doubling whatever your first card is each turn, and then countering whatever the opponent's first card is each turn. And this effect is pretty brutal. So if this is your commander, you just play a couple of rocks, bring this out quickly, and then it's actually hard to remove because they need to play something before they play their removal spell. And then if you have counterspell backup, they need to have something that gets countered, and then removal, and then another removal spell. So some decks just can't do that, because then like the first card costs so much that they just can't put double removal spell onto the stack after that. And I think this can potentially be really annoying to deal with, and it can get out of hand pretty quickly. One thing to note, this is each turn, so this also triggers on your opponent's turn. So if you are like if your first card during the opponent's turn you play is the counterspell, you basically put 2 counterspells onto the stack. And what's happening then is it is basically impossible for the opponent to use their like counterspell to protect their removal spell, because you have 2 counterspells on top, like on the stack. So that is like really hard to deal with. Or you just like they put the removal spell on the stack after something else got already countered, and then in response to that you draw cards and that gets copied twice and then you can counter. So yeah, I think when this comes down and the opponent, like when this comes down with some like a counter spell as a backup, it is extremely annoying to deal with. Also notably, this is basically not like the way this is worded. It's only it only triggers once each turn. It's not the first card each turn. So this basically starts like as soon as this hits the battlefield, this ability is relevant. So that is really good. Kyrie the Swirling Sky, 4 double blue, 6/6, legendary creature, dragon spirit, flying war 3. Whenever it dies, choose 1 out of 2. Either return any number of target non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less to their owner's hand, or mill 6 cards, then return up to 2 instants and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. Yeah, I am going to repeat myself here from the first review. I don't really value these dragons that do something when they die too highly, because like it's a pretty big investment to bring out. And it's a 6 mana 6/6 with a ward 3 and flying, so that's like a reasonable body. But I'd rather have an ETB than a leaf battle, like when than a die effect, because I don't want this to die in the first place, basically. And it's basically insurance, right? Like if you want to play a fatty, sure, but I'd rather have a fatty that does something when it ETBs as opposed to, oh, it dies, so I have some insurance. But this basically ensures that you're never going to have a 1-for-1 with this, because when it dies, it just generates a bunch of value. March of Swindling Mist, X and a blue instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, you may exile any number of blue cards from your hand. It costs 2 less for each card exiled this way, and up to X target creatures pays out. So just to to point this out, we're going to get a new Jeskai commander that has the ability of each target you're targeting with a spell, the spell costs 1 less for each of those targets, basically. So this will always only cost 1 blue with that commander, and it is insane with that commander. With this card, without that commander, it is okay. I don't see myself using this in every single deck. Phasing out is very versatile and flexible. Like if the opponent is on a storm deck and they want to pop off, right, and they are like committing some rituals, and then they want to just start like they go ritual Burgie, like play that, start to go ham, and then you just phase out their Burgie. Now they're currently stuck in this situation where they just invested a ton of storm count into storming off, but they now have trouble just generating mana. So you can remove problem creatures for a turn. Something is attacking you for lethal, now you phase it out and then just swing back. At their end step, you just phase out the whole board, swing in for lethal. They want to board wipe you. It is very flexible, but I'm not sure if the cost warrants this. I do have to say, however, the option of exiling a card and it costs 2 less for each of those cards is pretty strong. Because what is happening is you're going to play this and exile 1 card, and then 2 things phase out, and that is a lot of utility. So I'm excited to see how this card plays out. Mindlink Mech, 2 and a blue, artifact vehicle, 4/3, flying. Whenever it becomes crewed for the first time each turn, until end of turn, Mindlink Mech becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature that's crewed in this turn, except it's a 4/3, it's a vehicle artifact in addition to its other types, and it's flying. Crew 1. So first and foremost, this is incredibly easy to crew, which is pretty good. And let's dissect this a bit. So when it becomes crewed for the first time each turn, and then until end of turn, it becomes a copy of target non-legendary with other base stats. So optimally you want to copy something that is really strong but has a low base stats. Let's say a 1 mana, a 2 mana like 1/1 double striker. And now you accrue with the double striker on this, and now it's a 4/3 double striker, which is really strong and hits like a truck, right? So I like just copying something but having a different power and toughness. Like some things are really balanced around the fact that they have strong effects for their mana costs but awful stats, and this basically can work around that, and that is quite strong. So I see this being used in affinity decks, like in aggressive decks, and we can potentially have some really cool things happening there. Mirror Shell Crab, 5 double blue artifact creature crab, 5/7 ward and a ward 3, and channel 2 in a blue, discard it from the hand, counter target spell or ability unless it control pays 3. So channel is basically you pay a cost, you discard and the card from hand, and then you get an effect, and those effects are pretty hard to counter because it is an activated ability and not a cast. So this is kind of a soft counter that is hard to counter, and target spell or ability is really strong. Like it is really good utility. It usually doesn't warrant going up 1 mana though. I'd rather have a cheap counterspell that can interact in the early game, especially if it's a counterspell where the opponent can pay their way out of it. So I don't think this will make the cut in a lot of decks, but maybe if you care about, like, if you're a like reanimator deck, right? This is not a great body to reanimate, but it's better than nothing, and it can put itself into the graveyard. So maybe you want to play it there, but overall, I think this is just barely not good enough. Mnemonic Sphere, 1 in a blue artifact. For 1 in blue, you can sacrifice it to draw 2 cards, and then channel 1 blue, discard it, draw a card. So basically, this time channel is basically just cycling for 1 blue. And we get like basically all these artifacts we have to also evaluate from Emery's side of perspective, because like putting themselves into graveyard and like be played again from the graveyard is amazing for Emery. So the thing here is, for 4 mana we get a draw 2, but just having an artifact that is basically cycling 1 and just putting itself into the graveyard can be really valuable for the right deck. So I think this is a quite, like, you won't see this in every single deck, and not even in every single artifact deck, but if you're getting value from your graveyards hitting the getting value from your artifacts hitting the graveyard, I think this is a perfectly fine card. Mobilizer Mech, 1 in the blue, artifact vehicle, 3/4 flying. Whenever Mobilizer Mech becomes crewed, up to 1 target other target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, and then crew 3. This is quite interesting. Like, it has a lot of stats, but the crew is quite hefty. On the flip side though, while you're putting a lot of power into crewing this, it crews something else with it, which is exactly what you want in a vehicle deck. So if there is a vehicle deck happening, this is going to be in it. Otherwise, I don't see this happening. The Modern Age, 1 in blue saga, first 2 chapters, draw a card, then discard a card, each time basically. And then 3rd chapter transforms into a Vector Glider, a 2/3 enchantment creature, spirit with flying. So we get the like 2 looting effects, and then we get a decent body. I think this is like okay. I'm currently trying to wrap my head around if this is good enough in Ineos. Yeah, this basically comes in time for Ineos to be relevant, because you play this and draw a discard 3rd turn. Notably, because the way this transformation is worded, it exiles the saga and returns it to the battlefield. So the Vector Glider actually can't attack the turn it and like gets transformed. It attacks the next turn. But something that cares about flying creature attacking like Ineos, Ineos comes down on turn 5, so this is basically just in time for that. So I think that's pretty decent in there. Other than that, the card is a bit too weak at what it wants to do, I think. But I think in some decks you will play this, but overall I don't think you will see this too often. Moon Circuit Hacker, 1 blue, 2/1 enchantment creature, human ninja, ninjutsu, 1 blue. And whenever Moon Circuit Hacker deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard it unless Moon Circuit Hacker enter the battlefield this turn. So remember how I said I'm mostly going to evaluate ninjas or like ninjutsu cards based on their ninjutsu cost? Yeah, this is 1 blue. So this already has piqued my interest. And this thing is, I think, pretty good as far as other, like in the whole like ninja like amongst other ninjas. This is pretty good card because a 2-mana 2/1 is like okay, right? It's okay. You ninjutsu this in for 1 blue and it hits, and then it enters the battlefield this turn and just draws the cards and cantrips. And that is all it has to do. Like the rest, like drawing and discarding whenever it like further attacks, that's pretty like nice. But most of the time, if you're in a ninja deck and this gets to swing in the second time and is unblocked, you're just going to ninjutsu off of this, put this into your hand again, and then have your other ninja trigger. And now you can ninjutsu this back in for 1 blue again. So I think this is a great card for ninja decks, and probably not going to see too much play outside of that. Moonfolk Puzzle Maker. 2 in a blue, 1/4 artifact creature, Moonfolk Wizard flying. Whenever Moonfolk Puzzle Maker becomes tapped, scry 1. The stat line is awful. Affinity decks tend to be aggressive, and this is far from aggressive, and I don't think the tap effect is too relevant, so that's a no for me. Moon Snare Prototype, 1 blue, artifact, tap target untapped artifact or creature. Tap an untapped artifact or creature you control, add a colorless, and then channel 4 in the blue, discard Moon Snare Prototype. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of the library. I'm excited for this. This is basically a weaker version of Springleaf Drum, if you know that card. And this is amazing in affinity style decks. It's a cheap artifact. It can produce mana. Like, this is potentially just a 1 mana produce 1 colorless artifact. Like, if you're, again, I keep drawing this comparison. If you're an Emery deck, this is insane, because you just play this for 1 mana. Now you play another artifact for 1 mana, play your Emery because that costs only 1 mana now, and then you can also tap the Emery that you just played, add 1 more colorless and play another artifact, or you can do some it is really nice. I really like this card, and that's not even calculating the channel. Like, yes, for 5 mana, putting some non-land on top or bottom is not an effect you would play on its own, but this makes it so this card, like, this is an early game card, right? This is something you want in your opening hand to accelerate your plays. But the great thing about this ability is, even if you draw it later, it is not a dead card, because you can just like use it 5 mana and then remove something, and this is instant speed. So I think this is just an amazing card, and it has all of the bases covered. So I think you will see a lot of play of this card. Moonsnare Specialist, 3 in the blue, 2/2 creature, human ninja, ninjutsu, 2 in the blue. And then when it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand. Notably, this is not the opponent's creatures only. You can also return your own ninjas, basically, so you can get more ninjutsu triggers if you so desire. This card, we have a bunch of like 3 mana bounce something creatures, and those really don't see play unless you're a blue tempo deck, but Ninjas is exactly that, a blue tempo deck. So I think this is nice in Ninjas, and I think this is just a fair Ninja, and you're going to see this in Ninja decks, otherwise you're not. I feel like I'm going to say this a lot for Ninjas, but it's true, it's exactly how it works, right? Network Disruptor, 1 blue and 1/1 artifact creature Moonfall Rogue, flying. When it enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. Just on its own, this is a 1 mana 1/1 flyer artifact creature, which is already interesting enough, because if you're in Affinity style aggro decks, these are the creatures you want. This is great for Ninjas, because it's a 1 mana 1/1 evasive creature. We don't have too many of those if you're in like mono blue or something like that, so that is a welcome card. And then you also have like the little thing of enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. You can use this to, in for example Ninjas again, to tap down a blocker. You can use this in something like an Ineos deck to tap down a land that the opponent controls to make other like relevant plays, to play around counter spells or whatever. So I think this is just a solid card that will fit right into some of the decks. You won't see this this being played in every single deck, but overall, the decks that want it, like, this is a critical mass card basically, and a good one at that. Planar Incision, 1 and blue, instant, return target artifact or exile target artifact or creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter. So this is basically 2 mana blink, and then return it with a +1/+1 counter on it. So interestingly enough, this puts counters on the artifact as well. So if you bounce something like a Mana Rock, you're having a Mana Rock with a +1/+1 counter. So that's pretty cool. We have now more, like, this is one additional flicker effect for something like Orvar. So like Orvar really likes when this targets creatures or artifacts, notably for Orvar. So this is great for that. It is a bit pricey at 2 mana, right? And like, I don't think too many decks care about the +1/+1 counter, but I think it's a nice card to have in the format. Prosperous Thief, 2 and a blue, 3/2 creature, human ninja, ninjutsu for 1 and a blue. Only 2 mana ninjutsu, so got my attention already with that stat line. Whenever 1 or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So the way this is worded, this can only ever give you 1 or like maybe 2 treasures per attack, and the maybe 2 is referring to if you have a double striker. So like if you swing in with 3 ninjas, you only get 1 treasure, but if one of them has double strike, it deals damage twice in different instances, so you can get up to 2 treasures, basically. And I think this is a really, really strong ninja. If you're like blue-based tempo decks, you really like this card. If you're a ninja deck, you're going to play this 100%. You're going to be really happy to play this, because what this allows you to do, 1-drop and then 2-drop, ninjutsu this in, return the 1-drop to hand, you have a treasure, and now you can play the 1-drop again to then set up your ninjutsu plays for the turn afterwards, or you just hold up 1 mana to play something like a Spell Pierce. Next up, the Reality Chip, 1 and blue, legendary legendary artifact creature equipment jellyfish. Yes, you heard that right. Quite an interesting text there. You may look at the top card of your library anytime as long as it is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library and reconfigure, or, you know, I just got it equip for 3 mana. Well, 2 in a blue. So this can be your commander. And when it's attached to something, it has a pretty strong effect. And like, you just can play lands and like, you just play the top from a library and you can look at it any time. The opponent doesn't know what's on top, and that is just a huge amounts of value. The question is, how often are you going to attach to this? And that's what I'm fearing here. I don't think you will always, like, they can just kill the creature is the problem, right? This just doesn't sit around like an enchantment that's just like hard to remove. No, they can just kill the creature in response. They can kill the creature after you equip. They can just kill the reality chip before it becomes attached to something. So I think this might be too fragile for that effect, but we will have to see. Also another problem here is I would love to play this in a deck without that many creatures, but you have to play some amount of creatures to attach the reality chip to. But if you're playing that many creatures, why I'm not too sold on this, but keep an eye on for that one. Reality Heist. 5 and double blue instant. Costs 1 less for each artifact you control. So basically affinity for artifacts. And then look at the top 7 of your library. You may reveal 2 artifacts from among them, put them into the hand, put the rest on bottom of your library in a random order. So here's the thing. If you're playing in an affinity style deck, you really want to be careful to not put too many non-artifacts in your deck, because then you're not going to have enough artifacts to trigger these kinds of abilities. But this card might be strong enough that you actually put it into an artifact deck, because god damn is it powerful in the right deck. If you have 4 artifacts, this is basically like it is insane. Like if you cast this for 3 mana even, you're digging super deep and getting in probably in 7 cards in an artifact deck, you are going to hit 2 artifacts. And yeah, I think this is a really strong value engine. And again, in Emery, it's probably the best place for that, finding your paradox engines, and yeah, it takes you super deep. So I think this is a great card in those kinds of decks, and probably not played otherwise. Replication Specialist. 4 in blue, creature Moonfolk Artificer, 3/4 flying. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 in blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. So speaking of the artifact decks, and you want to be careful that you don't want to put in too many non-artifacts into your deck, I think this is one of the cards you don't put into your deck, because 5 mana, like 7 mana before you even copy one thing, basically, like to copy one thing, and it's easily removable. I think this is not it. So yeah, I think this is too expensive for its effect, and I'd rather have an artifact probably in those decks. Cyber Trespassers. 4 in a blue, 3/5 artifact creature Moonfall Rogue, channel 3 in a blue, discard it. Tap up to 2 target creatures you don't control. Those creatures don't untap during the controller's next untap step. I think this is, the stat line is atrocious, and I don't think the effects and the flexibility is there at all on this card, so I don't see this being played. Next. Short Circuit, 1 in the blue, enchantment aura, flash, enchant artifact or creatures. As long as enchanted permanent is a creature, it gets -3/-0 and loses flying. This is basically just a combat trick, and those don't see play whatsoever, so nope for me. Sky Swimmer Koi, 3 in a blue, creature fish, 3/3 flying. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This effect is, like, the effect itself is pretty strong in the right deck, but I'm probably not going to pay 4 mana for that. I'd rather have this on like a 2 mana 1/1 than a 4 mana 3/3 flyer. So nope. Spell Pierce. This is a reprint, and this is a good card. Sees play. Nice card. Reprint. Next. Suit Up. Tone Blue. Instant. Until end of turn, target creature or vehicle becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness or 5. Draw a card. So this is a cantrip and also a combat trick, basically, in one. And cantrips are great, combat tricks are not. And why play a subpar cantrip? Yeah, so I don't think this is too great. Tameshi Reality Architect, 2 in a blue, 2/3, legendary creature Moonfolk Wizard. Whenever 1 or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card, triggers only once each turn, and then X and a white, so this can be an Azorius commander, return a land you control to its owner's hand, return target artifact or enchantment card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So, there's a lot of things to unpack here. First and foremost, if we just evaluate this card for like its first line of text at its deadline, 3 mana 2/3, so it's like okay in stats. And then this doesn't care if the opponent's cards get returned to hand or your own cards get returned to hand. So you can trigger this with ninjutsu, you can trigger this with just regular bounce spells. So this, more often than not, basically draws you 1 additional card each turn, which just, you know, keeps the cards flowing, and I think that is pretty nice. Maybe you just want to do like a Azorius Ninja deck. Well, more often than not, you're going to be end up in Dimir though, but as a fun thought, that's pretty good. And then I think the last ability is pretty hard to evaluate. You're going to pay a premium for for this effect, but in return you're triggering the first ability and that draws you a card, right? So depending how you build your deck, this might, like, the returning the land might not be an upside, or may be just amazing because you can make another land drop if you don't have a land in hand to play already, or you can just draw a card here. So it kind of depends how you build your deck, right? How valuable the return clause is. And then you return an artifact or enchantment card from with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and only activate only as a sorcery. So you might want this to pair this with some looting effects, some ways to get artifacts or enchantments into the graveyard, or just like regular sagas that don't transform. And then when the saga is used up, you just return the saga. So I think this is a really interesting commander to build around. I don't see this happening too often, like this card being played too often in the 99. Excuse me. But I think this is really interesting to build around, and I think you can take this commander into a bunch of different directions. So yeah, exciting card. Tamiyo's Completion, 3 in blue, enchantment aura, flash, enchant artifact creature or planeswalker, enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. If it's an equipment, unattach it. And then enchant permanent loses all abilities and doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. We have a bunch of these effects already at 4 mana. I think this is too expensive, even though it has flash. So yeah, I don't think this will see too much play. Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh, 2 in double blue, planeswalker, 4 loyalty, passive ability. The first activated ability of an artifact you activate each turn costs 2 less to activate. Notably, this can reduce the cost to 0. And then +1, draw 2, discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. -2, target artifact becomes an artifact creature. If it isn't a vehicle, it has base power and toughness 4/4. Notably, this isn't until end of turn. This is basically for forever. -6, get an emblem with whenever an artifact you control becomes tapped, draw a card. So interestingly enough, I think this is a bit on the weaker side, depending what things you can do with this passive ability. like there are some, for example, equipments. You can just reduce the cost of equipping things to 0 with this, or like just make it really cheap, but then you're in mono blue if this is your commander. If this is not your commander, I don't see this card happening too often. But the main problem is that it kind of can't really project itself too much without previous setup, but it does generate you some amount of value. Overall, I think, like, if you're playing this card, you're probably playing it because of the passive ability. But more often than not, this is not the greatest planeswalker. It's just okay. Thirst for Knowledge. 2 to blue, instant, draw 3, then discard 2 unless you discard an artifact. This is also reprint, and this was also just a great card. So, yeah, deck card. Thousand Faced Shadow. 1 and a blue 1/1. Ninjutsu for 2 and double blue, flying. Whenever a Thousand Faced Shadow enters the battlefield from your hand, if it's attacking, create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. The token enters the battlefield tapped and attacking. So, I said previously, you mostly have to look at the ninjutsu cost, and this is extremely expensive to ninjutsu into the battlefield. And it can copy only another target creature. So the setup here is you attack with 2 creatures, and then one of them is unblocked. And then you return it to hand, and the other one, like, is maybe fighting another creature, but you can copy that one. And it's kind of like you can't really choose too much what you're like copying, right? And that is the big problem. Here is the big but. The really strong part about this card is it is a ninjutsu card with a like decent ninjutsu effect that is also an enabler, because it's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer, which is exactly what ninja decks want. This is like a 1-mana evasive creature. Just any way to get an unblockable, like, or hard to block thing onto the battlefield. So I think this is absolutely amazing for ninja decks, just for the fact that it is a ninjutsu card that is also enabling other ninjutsu plays, and I think it is great for that. Outside of that, I don't think it will see too much play. Next up, last card, Otawara Soaring City. Legendary land, tap blue, comes into play untapped by the way, and then channel 3 in the blue. Discard Otawara, the Soaring City, or no, not the, but Soaring City. Return to our artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So the cost of playing this in your deck is very low. You're going to replace a basic land most of the time with this, because, you know, it's just a legendary land, and taps add a blue, right? So very little downside. It is basically one of those cards you like if you're monocolored or like even dual colored, no brainer to put into your deck. Absolute no brainer. It doesn't even matter what the effect is, basically you just put it into your deck, because you're not going to need those basics most of the time. You're really not going to get punished for having one more non-basic onto the field currently in this format. We don't have cards like Blood Moon or whatever, so very easy to put into your deck. And then the effect is actually manageable. Like if you control your commander, right, that is a legendary creature most of the time, right, then it's for 3 mana, you bounce something, and that is just great value. So I think this is an amazing card. Yeah. So overall, very low cost to put into play. Also notably, this is a legendary land. We don't have too many of those, so if you are a deck that cares about legends, this is another free legend for you. So amazing card. And that wraps it up for my blue cards review for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out the description for the other parts if they have been uploaded yet. And yeah, hope you enjoy the next one as well.